Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council Online Briefing for Faith Leaders. In today's program, we present a faith journey conversation with Reverend Pastor and Civil Rights Leader, Reverend Dr. Amos C. Brown. A special thanks. The San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefings are supported by a grant from MetaFund. Thank you. The important and ongoing work of the San Francisco Interfaith Council would not be possible without generous funding from congregations, corporations, faith-based social service agencies, foundations, judicatories, and supporters like you. Help us spread the word. Visit sfinterfaithcouncil.org to learn about SFIC programming and how to become a supporter. Follow SFIC on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to SFIC's YouTube channel to watch all of our virtual events. A bit of housekeeping. Today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. Questions will be forwarded to the presenter for their review. To activate closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcription. Everyone vaccinated and unvaccinated still must mask on public transportation, in healthcare settings, congregate settings, long-term care facilities, and recommended in K-12 schools and childcare settings. This also includes some city buildings. But as of Friday, March 11th, San Francisco will not require proof of vaccination to enter restaurants, bars, gyms, and other settings where food and drink is consumed or elevated breathing occurs. Businesses can decide to be more restrictive and may require masks. The vaccines are safe and effective, so go to sf.gov to find a vaccine site or vaccine event in your neighborhood. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco. Together we can stop Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, call the SFPD at 415-553-1133. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. Pre-pandemic, a highlight of the San Francisco Interfaith Council's monthly breakfast was the faith journey. A variation on that theme, this week's SFIC Online Briefing for Faith Leaders will enter into a conversation with respected faith and civil rights leader, Reverend Dr. Amos C. Brown, pastor of the historic Third Baptist Church and president of the local chapter of the NAACP. To truly appreciate Reverend Brown's prophetic voice and stands he takes on critical issues, we will spend time examining those formative moments of his life and how they shaped his ministry and social justice ethos. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome friend, colleague, mentor, Rita R. Semel, founder and past chair of the council, who will say a few brief words to Reverend Brown and then offer the interfaith statement read at the beginning of each of these programs. Rita, it's wonderful to have you with us. I know it's touching to Reverend Brown that you're here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. A special welcome to you, Reverend Brown. I treasure my friendship with you and your wonderful wife and appreciate all that you have done to make our country a better place. Here's our statement, which we all agree to. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we're invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so, without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other, that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Welcome, everybody.
1,000 thanks, Rita. And now we are very blessed to have with us Rabbi Jonathan Singer, co-senior rabbi at Congregation Emmanuel. As you will hear in the course of this conversation, there's a very special relationship between these two congregations. And in the time that Rabbis Singer have been here, I know that there's been a very special relationship with Reverend Brown. So by intention, we asked Rabbi Singer to offer this morning's reflective moment. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you, Michael, and Boker Tov. Good morning, everyone. What an honor to be here and to learn more about Reverend Amos Brown's faith journey. That faith journey has been so inviting and inclusive of all faiths to stand together against injustice and help each of us find our voice. And Reverend Brown has nurtured a 35-year partnership, an ongoing partnership with Congregation Emmanuel. That one could have let lie fallow after the first relationship with the first rabbi, but he's renewed it with every one of us. And Reverend Brown, we see you as our teacher and our guide, even as we carry Torah forward in the world. We're grateful that you help us carry Torah forward even better. And I want to say to our faith leadership community, in a time like this, gatherings like this are more important than ever, that we stand up together and show a different face of what humanity can be, of how we can stand together and see God's holiness and beauty in each and every person, and reject the idolatry and will to power that we see coming out of Russia right now and punishing people in Ukraine. So we pray that God's will and force will help the people of Russia to see a different pathway and to return to the pathway of peace, the pathway that this group projects, a pathway that asks health for all of us, as this Interfaith Council has done so much to help sustain each and every one of us during this time of challenge. So I offer just a short prayer. Adonai Eloheinu ten bracha aleinu. Eternal God, share with us your blessing. Sim shalom tova uvracha. Help us find the pathway of peace, that we can sing words of peace and live under the vine and fig tree where none of us make us afraid. But we know, Adonai, to get to that path of peace, there have to be voices that come out of our civilizations to advocate for change and for hope. In just a few days, our community, Adonai, will be celebrating Purim, that moment where Mordechai says to Esther, perhaps you were born for this moment, to not be silent, but perhaps you've attained the royal decree for just such a crisis. Well, Adonai, we see Esther's spirit in Reverend Amos Brown, because the good Reverend speaks like Mordechai to all of us and reminds us that the bully pulpit and the chance to speak and bring our faith in an empty world is more important than ever. And to push back on the Ahasueruses within all of us, those who might dominate or not value life. Well, a 16-year-old girl, Esther, can change the world. So can we all together with our voices change that world. May we find peace. May we have blessing. And thank you, God, for the blessing of Mordechai and for the blessing of Amos, who comes out of the wilderness and pulls us to our best selves. Amen.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Singer, for that powerful message and really for that beautiful introduction into today's conversation. Back in 2015, I had the good fortune of interviewing Rita in a little booth at the San Francisco Public Library for a program called StoryCorps. And I realized as we were sitting there for our 45 or 50 minutes that we were creating an archive and a legacy that we could look back on in years to come. She tells us that in this work that we do, we meet the most wonderful people. And Reverend Brown is not only no exception, but he is just a model of what it is to meet wonderful people along this journey. Reverend Brown, my father used to say to me, you can see where a person stands if you know where they sit. And so today is all about seeing where you sit and those formative moments in your life that have formed your faith, your ministry, your causes. And you know, I've had the blessing of spending a lot of time with you over the last 15 years. And so you know that I'd like to lift up a lot of points in your life that maybe other people don't know about. And let's start here. If you could tell us about your beginnings, where you grew up, your parents, your siblings, your home life, and those early religious impressions, I think that would be the great foundation.
Thank you, my friend, Brother Michael Pappas, and to my other friends who are on this significant conversation. Rita, Semel, the mother and moving spirit of interfaith enterprises here in the city and county of San Francisco and in other parts of the world. And to Rabbi Jonathan Singer, you and your dear wife, Rabbi Beth, continued our tradition that was birthed 35 years ago of two congregations being too busy with enlightenment, engagement, empathetic movements, excellent programs such as Back on Track to enable young people to excel academically and to be the best that they can be. And this entire Interfaith Council network is very dear to me. I have no chance but to do what was instilled in me from the very beginning. When down in Jackson, Mississippi, I was born at 128 East Cohee Street. In those days, you didn't go to a hospital, and definitely hospitals were not that prevalent or open for Black people to access. But in that house, there was an atmosphere of interfaith, intercultural engagement. My mother and father, for 25 years, rented from a Jewish family, the Asher family. And some years ago, I happened to have found the descendants of the Asher family. That very house was still in their estate. And I told them my story. And they decided to sell that house to me. I still own the property. The house was torn down. But I want to make it very clear, I could not, I would not, and thank God my maker permitted me to engage in interracial, interfaith, intercultural, and even interdisciplinary endeavors academically. Unfortunately, we have too many small people in this world. That's why we have all of the pain that's going on now over in Russia and the Ukraine. It's because you have a man who's so small that he overcompensates by becoming a dictator, a czar, who causes great pain for others because he's paining. He's in trauma within. But in Jackson and at 128 East Cohee Street, I had that coveted experience of being a beneficiary of someone who's not of my race, not of my religion, not of my ethnicity, but thank God I am the better. So that's why when I came to the Third Baptist Church, now nearly 46 years ago, again, I just couldn't help it when I hooked up with Rita Semel, when I hooked up with Rabbi Kirshner, and when I hooked up in later years, more recently, with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, under an initiative that was inaugurated, to be truthful, by the church itself. Many people don't know, but if they had done as a prophet, Jesus of Nazareth, and been astute and continuous learners and readers, they would discover, I repeat, that in 1830, when Joseph Smith founded what was then called the Mormon Church, he had the distinction of being an abolitionist. Upstate New York, at the city of Fayette. And as the movement moved westward, there was the acculturation that took place. And the church at points did mirror some of the unfortunate racist attitudes and practices that we're still dealing with today. But to be fair to Joseph Smith, he, with pit bulldog determination, did not think highly of Brigham Young's position on race. But it's also a historical fact that many need to learn that Joseph Smith ran for president of the United States in 1844. And one major plank in his platform was the abolition of slavery by 1850. Unfortunately, he was assassinated, he and his brother Hiram. And when the church moved westward and settled in Utah, unfortunately, again, Mr. Brigham Young, who didn't get it right, wanted to insist that Utah be admitted as an enslaved state. But it didn't happen. And thank God that the present president, President Nelson, a physician by profession, but he is an empathetic social healer. Under his leadership 3 years ago, the church reached out to the NAACP. And at that time, I had the honor of serving as chairperson of the Religious Affairs Committee. And out of the conversations that we had across those 3 years, we came to the point of doing something tangible to deal with the racial problem in America. And they did support the president, the Council of the 12. And I am just excited. I can't believe it that in 2022, there will be a seminar, a fellows program of young people from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Network, the National NAACP, and from our local community, who will go to Ghana, West Africa, this July 31st through August the 11th, to sit down together and witness the unfortunate ground zero of that cruel Atlantic slave trade. And this is a teachable moment for the Americans and the world. Why? Because in this nation, we are infected with a certain disease that's afoot in the land of anti-critical race proponents. That's so sad. So sad that we are divided on this issue of race, to the extent that even educators, politicians, and faith leaders are not agents of truth-telling. And all critical race theory at its best, though it is not being taught in K through 12, as many people have erroneously stated, but at its best, it was nothing but a simple matter of telling the truth, what happened to my ancestors, of telling the truth of how mean Western thought, culture, political practices have been to Black people. And you touched earlier, Brother Pappas, on what was the beginning of my passion for prophetic leadership. Well, I have to go back to Mississippi. My Sunday school teacher, S.C. Randall, taught me at the age of 8 at Farish Street Baptist Church. And this dear lady, this sainted lady, went around the community in Jackson and picked up children and drove us to Farish Street Baptist Church, where I was baptized. One Sunday morning, she asked me, Amos, do you know what your name means in Hebrew? I said to her, no, ma'am. She said, well, sit down, son. Let me tell you. You have a good name. Your name means Amos, the prophet, who bears the burdens of the people. And she said to me, you're going to be a prophet, and you're going to speak for your people. You're going to tell people about justice. It's recorded in the book of Amos, in that 5th chapter, what Amos did. And you will do the same. And I never forgot that. And I had my initial opportunity to do some prophetic preachments around an issue that was very tragic. A tragic moment gave me an opportunity. And what was that moment? When I picked up the Jet magazine that I sold there in Jackson in the historic Farish Street district. And I saw that mutilated head of Emmett Till. I was horrified. I was shaken. I was confused. And Mr. Medgar Wiley Evers had just assumed his responsibilities as the newly appointed field director of the NAACP in the state of Mississippi. His office was located 5 blocks from my home house. And when I went to his office and told him how upset I was, he looked at me and said, Amos, I understand how hurt, disappointed, and frightened you are about what you've seen here on the cover of this magazine. He said, but don't just be fearful, upset. Don't even be angry. Let's be smart and strategic. Why not? Let us organize a youth council of the NAACP so that you and your young friends will learn how to fight this evil of race and injustice in a strategic, peaceful, and legal way. And I organized the first youth council at the age of 14. And Mr. Evans as a consolation prize, so to speak, for me, having done that. Asked my mother if I could come to San Francisco to attend the national convention of the NAACP. He had just bought a 1955 Oldsmobile, and I never shall forget that journey. The first time I was to be in the West. We left Jackson, went to Vicksburg, from Vicksburg, Shreveport to Shreveport, Dallas to Amarillo, Amarillo down to Santa Fe, Flagstaff to Needles, from Needles up through the valley and then to the Bay Area. And that was the first time I saw that much water. But I was able to land at an experience at the Civic Center that was to be another enriching moment in my life. For it was at that national convention in 1956 that I first met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he spoke for Youth Night. And I have a copy of his address. I met Miss Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, Roy Wilkins, Kivy Kaplan, also of the Jewish community, who were at one time served as chairperson of our National Life Membership Committee. And A. Philip Randolph, the great labor leader, was there. So that experience, again, gave me the opportunity along my journey to be consistent and to keep faith with prophetic engagements. Now, let's fast forward, friends. How unfortunate, how sad it is that just this week, the US Senate, after 100 years, finally voted to enact the Emmett Till anti-lynching law. Let's think about it, I repeat. It took over 100 years for this nation, through its Senate, to say it's wrong to lynch a Black person. Now, you know, that was very touching for me. Why? Because my native state of Mississippi has the infamous distinction on record in the history book of committing more lynchings than any state in the United States. To be exact, since 1882 to 1968, there have been 581 lynchings that were known. So that tells us again that we have made progress, yes. We've had legal enactments, but in the words of the poet, we still have miles to go and promise to keep before we can fall asleep. We are not that united nation. One nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. And that's why, even down to these 81 years that God has permitted me to be in this crusted earth, I have never forsaken my moral obligation to stand up and to speak out against injustice, race baiting, homophobia, xenophobia, nationalism, misogynistic ways of even faith leaders in this nation. Thank God for Temple Emmanuel. Thank God for the Third Baptist and other faith communities where women are not just celebrated in a ceremonial activity, but women are given the opportunity and the right to stand and exercise their God-given talents as heralds of good news, justice, peace, and love.
Reverend Brown, your encyclopedic memory, we marvel at. Your eloquence, we marvel at. I know a lot of this was formed at Morehouse College. Anytime I mention that word, I see a sparkle in your eyes. I know they were important years. I know that at Morehouse, you had the opportunity, none other except 4 other people had, to be taught by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I was wondering if you could tell us about those Morehouse years, and then after Morehouse, what prompted you to go to seminary and what those seminary years were like?
Well, I entered Morehouse in 1959, the fall of 1959. And here again, I had no choice but to go to Morehouse because at my home church, the College Hill Baptist Church, the chairperson of the deacons ministry was Dr. B.B. Dansby, B. Baldwin Dansby, who also was a Morehouse man. And he served as president of Jackson State College. And the church that I attended was a practicum for aspiring theological students, those who were entering the ministry. They got some practice for their preaching. And this man was elegant, tall, had gray hair, And every time he spoke in College Hill, I knew that there was something about that man. But when I came to San Francisco and met Dr. King and heard him speak, and on that youth night, I never shall forget that he closed his oration saying, "I have the dream that the day will come when all of God's children, from base black to treble white, will be significant on the Constitution's keyboard." Well, Dr. King had a dream, but still Black people are not significant on this keyboard. And the way that the United States Supreme Court is now acting, the way legislators are now trying to suppress the Black vote, again, it says we are not that significant as Blacks. But that night was the night that a dream was uttered. And I followed the man who declared the dream. And when Dr. King left Montgomery in 1960 to come to Atlanta to be co-pastor with his father at Ebenezer, it was Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, the last of the great Black schoolmasters, as Lerone Bennett dubbed him in Ebony magazine some years ago. When he came back to Atlanta, it was Dr. Mays who said to him, "Dr. King, before you go to the next level in the civil rights movement, maybe you should consider coming aside to do some teaching and reflecting before you go to the next level in this movement." And it was Dr. Mays who taught Dr. King into team teaching this seminar in social philosophy. And I was chosen as one of the 8 students in the only class that Dr. King taught in his lifetime, the semesters of 1961-62. And I have copies of his lecture notes. And also I have a copy of the class roster, and it is documented. And I cherish one thing about that class, among many. Dr. King one day was lecturing about Dr. Brightman, who was up at Boston University's concept of personalism. And in a Socratic method, we got to the point of understanding what personalism was, as he raised the right questions with us in terms of what it should mean in terms of how you would treat a person who was gay, of a different race, of a different religion, or a different gender. And the long short of it is that the class left that setting that day with the understanding, and I never forgot it, that regardless to how different a person might be, they are still a person and should never be reduced to the level of being disrespected, dissed, or injured. And that's why even during my early days in this city as pastor of Third Baptist, when AIDS was a virus or disease that people couldn't do the right thing in terms of dealing with it, you had a many conservative, right-wing, Bible-banging believers who did not know that even Jesus was a master in the embodiment of personalism, Well, he always saw the person as being of worth and dignity. And Dr. King told us also in that class that we should, as African Americans, respect the rights of all people. That's why when we decided to sit down in the sitting movement in 1960, the presidents of the AU Center College called us to Harkness Hall conference room and said to us, we know you all maybe have in mind doing what the young people have already done in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in 1958. Let me say parenthetically here, the sit-down movement did not start in Greensboro on February 1st, 1960. The sit-down movement, and this is documented at the Library of Congress, and I was alive, naturally, to witness that I was involved. The sit-down movement started on August the 28th, 1958, on the auspices of the NAACP Youth Council, led by Barbara Posey, who's still alive, who's president, and Clara Looper, who's deceased. They broke down segregation in Oklahoma City before February the 1st. And there were two other youth councils, Wichita, Kansas, and Louisville, Kentucky. So you see NAACP has always been on the firing line, not just engaged in litigation, and court battles. We also knew how to get out there on the front line and lay our bodies on the line. Well, it is important that we understand that what Dr. King said about personalism will do a whole lot to create a better world if we would just realize every person is somebody and has dignity and worth. And that's what I got in that class, I repeat. And that haunts me. And that's why in San Francisco also, fast forward back to here, I stood up against those people who were bashing gay people, transgender people, and marriage equality. I made it very plain that there's a difference between religious rights, R-I-T-E-S, and civil rights, and that even gay people, because they're persons, were entitled to having equal protection under the law. Why? Because they are persons living in America. And we should never reduce any person down to being a thing or tool, as enslavement did for our ancestors, as the Holocaust did to the Jewish community, and as this nation has done to women. Women didn't have the right to vote until about 100 years ago. This thing is all insane. You got one gender, one race, one group elevating itself up as if they are an idol. And that's the sin. That's the injustice that even Aristotle did when he, during the 4th century, before that prophet Jesus of Nazareth was born, said in his Politics, what did he say? The black man, the Ethiopian, is inferior. And the only way that he or she can become somebody, you have to go up to the Nordic climate of Europe and become lighter. Secondly, he said, that the black man or the Ethiopian will never be capable of self-governance, that you always have to have a white person over a black person. And that's the sickness, that's the evil of the racist lie that's been told. And that's why, unfortunately, Mr. Donald Trump was infected with that lie when he called Africa an S-hole. When he said, we don't need no more people coming here from Nigeria. Why can't we get them coming in as immigrants from Norway? Well, again, because he was not enlightened, because he didn't have love in his heart, and he didn't know anything about Dr. King's idea of personalism, he erroneously was a victim of the ignorance, because all of us came from Africa, according to the paleontologists. That was our first habitat. Leakey made that very clear as a paleontologist. But as we migrated around this globe, we developed different cultures, and wherever we stopped along the way with different languages and different practices, we failed to mind our manners as humankind. We didn't do what my mother told me when I left home, and that was to behave. Be kind to people. Don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. And remember also, they said, don't be pushy and ask for anything. Let someone offer it to you. But what is happening over there with Putin now? He's not just pushy, but he, again, is invading, taking over. And America was guilty of the same sin with the Native American. Instead of them saying, we are not about conquest, we're about cooperation. Oh, we would just cooperate, lock arms, like we're doing in this Interfaith Council, lock arms, like Temple Manual and Third Baptist are doing with Back on Track. Lock arms and be together. I'm afraid that if we don't come together, if we don't get a remnant who will stand up and change the trajectory of this nation, we are going to go the same way as the Roman Empire went. According to Gibbon in his book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, there are some eerie parallels there. First one is Rome could not rebuild its infrastructure. Does that sound familiar? That's happening right now. We have not gotten on the way to rebuilding our roads, our airports, getting rid of these potholes. And then, of course, the Caesars, the emperors, lived high on the hog, while the plebeians lived in squalor, poverty. We have the same thing going on in America. I support capitalism, yes, but it ought to be responsible, just capitalism. That the wealthy would not get wealthy at the expense of the poor and the masses. So that's about it. Next question.
Want to get personal and talk about blessings. You've got one of the greatest blessings in Jane Brown. I first met both you and Jane. Your reputation had preceded you, but in Rome at the Vatican for the consistory of Cardinal Leveda in 2006. And she made such an impression on me, and I can see that her support has enabled you to do so much of what you've been able to do, Reverend Brown. Would you tell us where you met and tell us about your family and how they have helped shape who you are?
Well, again, I met my dear wife, Jane Evangeline Brown, at a demonstration. And would you believe it, that she was a student at Spelman College and I was at Morehouse. And I was leading along with a young white student at Georgia Tech. We were co-leaders of a sit-down movement. White First Baptist of Atlanta, Georgia, where Charles Stanley was then the assistant pastor and Dr. Roy McLean was the pastor. Had not gotten enough good religion that they would permit Blacks to worship in that church. They would let Blacks who are from foreign mission fields come just as visitors, but no Black person worship in White First Baptist of Atlanta. But on that Sunday morning, the trustees and ushers, deacons literally picked up students and threw them out of that church. They couldn't get to Tex Ritter and myself because we were down front and they didn't want to have that much of a ruckus going on. They were just coming on television. But they went to the back and they told these young people, get out, picked them up, pushed them out. That happened in 1960s. And yet, the Southern Baptists, unfortunately, has continued what it's always done. It's been on the wrong side of history. It's on the wrong side of history when it came to the issue of enslavement. For in 1845, the Southern Baptist Convention was organized in Augusta, Georgia. And what was the issue about? Nobody's going to tell us that if we are missionaries, that we can't also own our slaves. That's how it came to be. When it came to the desegregation of schools, the same thing. These Christian academies were founded back in the late 50s as a reaction to the Supreme Court decision, was a means to get around integration. And now today we still have de facto segregation in public school. Also, it has happened here in San Francisco. Back to my point. Jane was that beautiful young lady there waiting outside with those other students from Spelman. And she was good to die. And what did I do? I'm going to tell on myself. Confession is good for the soul. I told her a little untruth. I told her that Dr. Benjamin Mays wanted to get a report on what happened at the demonstration. Well, it was partially true because he did want to know what happened. But I also editorialized on it and said, he would like to get your impression. And Jane often laughs and tells me how tricky I was. I wanted to find out if she knew how to write. But she did. And she got her bachelor's degree from North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. She was on an exchange program from Spelman that was very popular back in the day during the 60s. But she decided to stay at North Central, this church-related Church of the Brethren college, private school. and she got a master's from the University of Minnesota in business administration. And she has been an astute, accomplished business person. She's a real estate broker and agent. And we have 3 children, biological children, Amos and David, and Kizzy. I know that name would resonate with some, where she was born at the time that Roots came out. And I must say that she has, as a word, her name means, she's stayed put and has done an excellent job as a young lady. She finished Spelman, got her master's from Fordham University in New York, and in social work. And she has 3 children. And she married a young man from the homeland, from Mother Africa. Her husband, Kingsley, is from Ghana. And coincidentally, we did an ancestry search, and it was discovered that Jane's father, Irvin Russell Smith, is a descendant of the Khan in Ghana, West Africa. And Mother Jane Smith, Lord willing, this coming March 26th will be 104 years old.
Oh my.
And she still has her wits. And she still knows what's going on. And she's quite a personality, very engaging individual. Everybody just loves her. And again, we are beneficiaries of interfaith, interracial, intercultural blessings. She is right now, as we speak, going through her physical therapy at the Jewish home here in San Francisco, and will be coming home in a few days to get ready to celebrate her 104th birthday. And our youngest son, David Josephus, again, David, biblical name, Josephus, the historian. And that's also the name of a man who was a spiritual and intellectual mentor to Martin Luther King and to all of the Black students who went to Crozer Seminary. Josephus Pius Barber. He is the man. He was one of the first Blacks to finish Crozer back in the 30s, who helped Dr. Martin Luther King bridge the academy to the hood and to the church. Well, David's middle name came from Josephus Pius Barber, who's one of my fathers in the ministry. My father was also a rural itinerant preacher in Mississippi. My grandfather was a preacher. And thanks to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, here again, blessings just keep on coming from different sectors, different places. Do you know it was through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that I got an understanding of why I just couldn't help it, and I had to be true to my roots and to my DNA. for going back 5 generations. 5 generations. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints got the documentation of my great-great-great-grandfather, Patrick Brown, being born enslaved in 1821 in Franklin County, Mississippi. 1821. But again, because I had, good genes, great genes, tough genes, Patrick Brown in 1882, even though he had been an enslaved man, bought 150 acres of land and paid $150 for it, and through the Family Research Center in Salt Lake City, Utah, we were able to get copies of the receipts where my grandfather, Patrick Brown, paid off that loan on that land. And then they also have the record of where he received as chairman of a church that he helped to found, the Bethlehem Baptist Church of Roxy, Mississippi, there in Franklin County. These men gave him and 2 other officers an additional acre. And with that acreage, they were to build a school and a church. That's the same community where Richard Wright, who wrote Black Boy and Native Son, and was quite a writer and social critic, died in France. And he wrote a lot about the evils of racism, fascism. So again, I say, beware of how you put down other people because they have a different religion, they have different ethnicity. For you will be shortchanging yourself. Each of us has something to contribute to civilization. And no one group has done it all, knows it all, has said it all. We need each other. And our older son, Amos Jr., is quite a man. He manages a department and sales for this Tesla car industry. He was originally with the company that's over in Korea. The Genesis, the Koreans gave us the Genesis car. Here again, another group, another land gave us a car that moves with gusto and glide. And of course, I also have a nephew who's like a son, whom I reared, and Jane and I together. And he pastors a big church in Brooklyn, New York, the Emmanuel Baptist Church. And he has continued in Uncle's spirit and mantle. He's done a lot of work in Africa. And he's done a lot of work in helping churches be more efficient by providing seminars and lectures to young preachers who are doing a great job of being on the cutting edge and being about holistic ministries.
Reverend Brown, we're not done yet. And it was probably a mistake for you to have that clock hanging behind you. But I remember I once asked you if you'd speak for 3 minutes, and you said, son, it takes me that long to clear my throat. We have a couple more questions that I think are important and that need
Go right ahead.
your love for San Francisco has taken you beyond the pulpit. A fact that some might not realize is you served on the city's Board of Supervisors. Would you speak to us about your triumphs and struggles of those years and other civic causes of that era that you fought for?
Well, I had the opportunity of being on the Board of Supervisors thanks to Mayor Willie Brown. And Mayor Brown decided to run for mayor. I gathered up all the faith leaders who met and supported him. And I do not regret that I served on that board. Why? Because the one problem that we are dealing with today, homelessness. When I introduced the measure entitled Care and Not Cash, the progressives went after me. And all of Mayor Brown's appointees. What did it say? It wasn't that people didn't need cash. But way back there, 20 years ago, the idea was people who are unhoused or homeless needed a holistic ministry. They needed wraparound services, not to be just given money. Why? Because unfortunately, Mr. Reagan closed all of those state mental institutions. Some of them did need to be held accountable. They were not being humane, compassionate, and treating people as being persons. But the body politic did not take the attitude of not throwing out the baby with the bath. So we closed down those state institutions with the promise that there would be county and local community facilities that they never delivered on. And consequently, what are we doing today? We are in a terrible state. And we have been dubbed Gotham City around the world. Not just in the Tenderloin, but throughout this city. It is to the discredit of our city that with all of our institutions around here, with all the monies here, we have more billionaires per capita, says one study that came out some time ago, than any major city in the United States of America. But now, what's happening? A good friend who was on the board with me, actually sat next to me, our now Governor Newsom, has come around to everything that I said 20 years ago when it comes to this issue of homelessness. And I think that the Interfaith Council has also been of that mind, for we have been providing shelters, we have been providing food, and we have had voices who have spoken about the need for a more holistic approach to this problem. And if anyone can and should do it, San Francisco, the city of St. Francis, ought to be about doing it and not politicizing the issue or being extremist. I like them to do this way. You have a good dress, a suit, a blouse. If it's wrinkled, you don't throw it away. You get an iron and you iron it out. And in this city, we have not come to the ironing board, so to speak, to iron out this problem of unhoused people, again, being treated as less than persons. We ought to be working with the homeless to empower them, not to condescend to them, not to salvage our conscience by just throwing some money at them when they're standing at the off-ramp, off the freeway. We have enough resource that people had a heart and were concerned about seeing the plight of others and not just looking out for self. We would be able to lick this problem. But my time on the board was not as a politician, a peerless politician, but to be a prophet, to speak the truth, even when it makes us uncomfortable. To do it respectfully, yes, but to never be silent in the face of brutality, injustice, and exclusionary practices that treat the less fortunate and the marginalized as not being deserving of opportunity and a better plight than they have as homeless or unhoused persons.
Reverend Brown, throughout this this briefing, you have referenced with great love your relationship with the LDS Church. We have with us today, and I'd like to ask her to come and join us for just a moment, a board member here at the San Francisco Interfaith Council from the LDS Church, and that's Paige Housekeeping. Paige, I asked you to come on in particular just to speak to the church's commitment to the fellowship to Ghana that has been offered in Reverend Brown's name. That's a great honor, but I was hoping that you would take just a moment to speak to that, and then Reverend Brown, you can respond.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. And I just wanted to start off by saying how grateful I am to be with you all today, and honored, Amos, to hear from you and to learn from you. I know that your relationship with the leaders of the church has been such an important thing to them and to the church as a whole. And you are continually inspiring us to come together and to serve all of God's children. It was this last year during the week of Juneteenth when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the United Negro College Fund came together to announce a shared vision and 3 shared initiatives, one being the donation to the Amos Brown Student Fellowship to Ghana, which I think is amazing. And our prophet, President Nelson, referenced the 2 great commandments from the book of Matthew during that announcement, and saying, those are the things that we have found common ground with Amos, with the NAACP, that thou shalt love thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind, and the second being that thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. He also said that it is this common ground that has brought us together, as Amos and the church leaders has discussed the challenges that beset some of God's children. And though those challenges be huge and our capabilities are limited, together they wanted to make a difference, even though the efforts may seem small. He further on went to say that we seek to build bridges of cooperation instead of walls of segregation, and that our differences need not undermine society's shared humanity. And I really loved that. And I just wanted to say, Amos, that I personally haven't worked on these initiatives, but have benefited from them and found so much inspiration in our partnership with you and with the NAACP, especially in a time like now when we can feel so divided as a people. And wanted to thank you for your willingness to allow others to change and your extension of forgiveness throughout. Your continuous outreach and love for God's children and your tireless efforts to serve them is a beacon of light to all of us. And on behalf of the church as a board member, just wanted to again just say thank you and how excited we are for this program.
Amen.
Thank you.
Reverend Brown, when we think about you, we also think about Third Baptist Church, your other love, that you've devoted so much of yourself to. Can you just take a moment to talk about your Third Baptist Church?
Well, yes, one of God's choice, greatest faith communities, south of heaven, north of hell. And in great measure, it has this distinction as an historic institution because it was founded by a woman, Eliza Davis, who, by the way, lived to be 103 years old. She was from Virginia, from the same area that my wife and our mother are from. Something about those Virginia ladies. Well, Eliza Davis came here in 1852. Her husband, Bill Russell, preceded her by 2 years. He came to dig gold, to mine gold. But she called the meeting in her home up there on Vallejo and Hyde Streets. August the 1st, 1852, I repeat. What's magical about that day? What's the significance about it? That was the anniversary of the abolition of enslavement in the British West Indies. And just a few days before, Frederick Douglass, the great orator, delivered that speech on the 5th of July. What does the Declaration of Independence mean to the slave? And in that great oration, among other things, he gave a scathing indictment of organized white Protestant Christianity and the hypocrisy of the faith. And I would recommend that everyone would read his 4th of July speech. I cite this history to say that there's always been in the DNA, in the bones of Third Baptist, to be a balanced personal piety and social justice faith community. That's why Paul Robeson, when he had been maliciously maligned and falsely accused of being a communist, found a home in Third Baptist. It was on July the 26th, 1957, that he gave a concert and a lecture on Negro spirituals in the present sanctuary here at 1399 McAllister Street. And it was on April the 13th. April the 13th, 1858, that Blacks had to leave San Francisco because of racism and oppression disenfranchise them. They couldn't even serve on juries. But Governor Douglas up in British Columbia said, come on up to British Columbia. If they won't accept you in San Francisco, and you can settle your communities here. And over 800 Blacks got on that ship, the Commodore, and went up to British Columbia. And it was in 1958 that W.E.B. Du Bois celebrated his 90th birthday here at Third Baptist and spoke to a capacity audience. And I have pictures here in my office of his speaking to an interfaith, interracial audience. And that same year, February the 24th, 1958, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke from this pulpit in Third Baptist Church. When he and my predecessor, Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes Sr., said to Dr. King, come west with your movement. And out of that base, the Human Rights Commission was founded. Blacks could not get a job selling cars on Van Ness. And we couldn't even get into hotels earlier, particularly around the time when the United Nations was founded. United Nations was founded here in 1945, but Ralph Bunche, Undersecretary of the United Nations, was not even welcome at the San Francisco, the hotel over on Nob Hill, the Fairmont. They had to get a special dispensation, special arrangements for Ralph Bunche to get a room. And at that meeting also, when the United Nations was founded, there was the great Mary McLeod Bethune, Gardner Calvin Taylor, the great Prince of Preachers who delivered the sermon at Bill Clinton's interfaith worship service at both instances when he was inaugurated as president of the United States, his first and second terms. So you see, we have a lot that's going on here at Third Baptist that represents a holistic ministry and an interfaith fellowship is always welcomed here. And we have never had a split in this church either. In 170 years, be this August. And I attribute that to the fact that we have always been focused on people, 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 not fussing and skunk fights about theology and this and that. But we've been about ministry and loving everybody. And speaking of loving everybody, let me extend our love circle to the legacy of one Howard Washington Thurman, who wrote that definitive book, Jesus and the Disinherited. And he, along with Dr. Fisk at San Francisco State, in 1944, founded what became the Fellowship Church of All Peoples. They founded that church, Fellowship Church, in First Unitarian Church, the same church where Dr. Thurman was funeralized, and I was a pallbearer at his funeral. So you see here again, we've had the opportunity of having this interfaith network do historic and outstanding things. Because Third Baptist Fellowship Church, and in 1944, who was there standing up with the Japanese community? To make sure that there would be a prophet in the land speaking out against what unfortunately Mr. Roosevelt did, of signing the measure to put Japanese person, taking people away from their stores, their businesses, from their families because of their race. Yes. But Dr. Thurman, Third Baptist, Dr. Haynes were always there when it came to a prophet's answering present in times of crisis and challenge.
You, Reverend Brown, are the prophet of our age. We say thank you to you. This, of all the briefings, this has been the longest, but a testimony to you, the overwhelming number of people on this call, like myself, have been captivated by your every word. We probably could have gone another hour. I wanted to just say to you that when I go to City Hall, by intention, I go via McAllister Street. And every time I pass Third Baptist, I realize I'm high on a hill that's overlooking City Hall. You continue to keep your eyes out, and you continue to do the amazing work that you've done. I consider it a rich personal blessing to count you as a friend and a colleague, as I know so many of our colleagues in our interfaith world do here in the city. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
God bless you.
God bless you. And I want to thank all of those who joined us today. Remind you that this recording link will be sent to you all, as well as to our 5,000, almost 6,000 e-subscribers by day's end today. Feel free to share it. And we also welcome you back next week when we will have the professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State, who founded the Stop Asian Hate movement, Dr. Russell Jung, who will be with us to speak to that very, very important issue and timely issue and critical issue here in San Francisco. This concludes today's program. Thank you, and God bless you.
Bye.